To the PmP End of Month review for May. If you're not familiar, PmP stands for Painters Motivating Painters, and it's a Facebook group open to miniature painters of all levels of ability where people share questions and advice on the hobby. We also have a monthly event where people can post their work on a particular theme, and we give feedback, constructive feedback in a video format. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, then head over to Facebook and sign yourself up. This month's theme is Monsters and Machines, and we have some excellent examples for you, so let's get into it. So our first submission for the month was Andrew Jameson, and he's looking for feedback on his converted zombie lord on, or lich lord on zombie griffin. Looking for feedback on the color composition, conversions, is it sounding as undead, and general feedback as well. So I'll start off there. I think the color composition is really nice. I like how you've got the greenish colors on the base and that kind of purpley, reddy, is very interesting kind of color for the feathers, and it's an interesting choice as well. A lot of people would kind of go, they'd want to have a more like naturalistic look, but I think for if you're trying to make it look unnatural or undead, then that's a great choice to help with that. The I think maybe one of the things that kind of helps with it a lot with the whole undead feel is the kind of glowing eye and the green necromantic energy, which you can see a lot on the rider, but not as much. You can see it in the beast's eye. But just if you wanted to draw people's attention a bit to it more, you could have maybe a bit more of the green on the rider himself. Like if one of the plumes on his hat was green, that would kind of draw you in and you'd be looking for something. Whereas it's like, it's a nice detail and you can pick up on it when you're looking at it a bit closer, but just to give some people something at tabletop height to kind of zoom in on. I think, to be honest with you though, on those graveyard bases and painted the way it is, everyone's going to be like, yep, that's an undead thing. That checks out totally. And then they'll see themselves that there's like the stitching and kind of stuff like that you've put in to further the effect. Um, and then generally, yeah, I think it's really good, especially for like an army type thing. It's quite eye catching, and you've got good like OSL effects going in there for extra detail, uh, and then the basing like works extremely well with the model. So I think you've done a great job on this fella.
Yeah, I'd agree, man. I just had a couple of nitpicky things for tabletop. I mean, woof, it's pretty damn good. I wouldn't go much further myself. I just thought that one thing that caught my eye is it seems a little bit off center, too off center for the base. But that might just be a preference thing for me. But I think if it was a little bit closer to the center, then it'd feel a little better. And I think just a missed opportunity really on the stitching. There looks like there is some sort of pink and some bruising there, but I just exaggerating that a little bit more would be really, really nice as well. And I just wanted to call out the pink feathers, that looked awesome, and also this texture that you've put on the beak. That's really nice touch that you've done there, especially for tabletop. So yeah, there you go, Andrew. Cheers, man. Thanks for submitting. Alex, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention the texture on the beak as well, but also on the his little hands, claw things on the monster. Sort of again, that sort of texturing on
Oh
the
yeah.
skin there looks really nice.
Hmm.
And I don't know this model particularly well, and I couldn't immediately pick out and say, that's where the conversions are, that's where the extra sculpting things are. So as far as I'm concerned, that's always a good sign when you're trying to do that sort of stuff. The one thing for me is just the color of the riders like clothes. It's pretty much exactly the same as the wings. It just blends in a little bit too much. You can keep it in the same color palette, even the same colors, but maybe a bit brighter. Maybe your sort of shadow color for that is maybe the mid-tone color for the wings, and then the highlight goes a bit brighter, sort of thing, just to make it pop a little bit more if you want that same color cohesion. But no, I think the scheme's really nice and it's really nicely painted.
Cool.
Great.
All right, moving on then. Mike Gephard with this white star drake type thing. Loving the model. Thinking about what you should have done to make the metallics pop a bit more. So on this one, it's kind of tricky to read it a little bit because of the lighting on the picture. I've found it is blowing out the highlights quite a bit, so it's kind of tricky to review it. But I'll do my best with what's here. So with the gold, I think you've got a really nice tone for the gold here, and you've obviously gone in the right direction of in shading it in certain places. So like at the tops of these sort of armband cuffs here, and sort of down the sides there, and in the collar bit particularly is the bit that stands out. So it is lacking a bit of pop, and I think the reason for that is you need to go a little bit further with your shading. So take it a little bit further and also expand the volumes a little bit. Highlighting it, I mean, people say use silver to highlight gold. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of doing that. So what I do personally is I push the shadows and let the midtones and the metallics do the work of running the reflections. But if you control the lighting with the shadows a little bit more here, I think that's really going to help. So, for example, on this this guard here, this sort of shin guard, you would want to have a really bright central highlight running down the whole volume, as opposed to the sort of spectral highlights that you've picked out at the minute. And then as the surface falls away to each side because it's curved, you'd then fall into shadow, but then add secondary reflections in that aren't as bright or as wide as the main one. Same for this one down here, because it looks like the lighting's coming in from sort of the 2 or 3 p.m. angle. So you'd have to then take that across to the other shapes. This collar piece around his neck is actually you're in the. I think your strongest area is just here. So yeah, pushing details that way would really help that pop out. And then I just wanted to say that all the other finer details on the Drake are picked out really nicely. So you've got good separation there, which is where I see people struggle quite a lot of is separation. But this was done really nice. I don't know if that was an oil wash or something, but great success. And then the only other bit of feedback really was just to try and structure the muscles a little bit more, and put some more shadows in some places just to define them. It all looks quite uniformly lit, like from the back, but the way that the light is reacting with the gold, the lighting angle's a little bit off with the rest of the Drake. So yeah, just to adding some shadows to shape it a little bit more, mate. I think that would be really strong. But great looking piece, man. Really nice little details. So yeah, there you go. Thanks for submitting, Mike. Anyone else?
Yeah, just one thing for me is just on the focus of it. It's not disfocused at all. It doesn't have that thing that you sometimes get from models where your eyes keep dotting around and jumping around because there's too many things to focus on. But my eyes don't really settle anywhere in particular either. They kind of just sort of glaze over the whole thing. And so just in terms of like bringing up the highlights on the face a little bit brighter or the body down a bit more. But again, the photo's a little bit overexposed, so it could easily just be that. It's a little bit hard to tell sort of on the way the photo is, but from what we can see, I think it does generally look like it's quite nicely painted. And it's yeah, no, I think on the metallics, I think you've covered pretty much everything there.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that in terms of color palette wise, it's very tight. Like you're really working a lot in kind of warm tones like yellow, brown, yellow, whites, that kind of thing. And that might be one of the reasons why your gold, you're having a little bit of difficulty popping it out. Because if you think if this guy was a blue dragon, the gold itself would just stand out way more than it does on him, and then on his base as well. So even if you had some kind of pop color, like having blue eyes in there, that'd also help with the focus, and just makes your life a little bit easier. Obviously, if you want to go for this very bleached out deserty look, that's cool as well. But it can just it means that you'll have to do more of the work through value contrast, since there's not as much contrast of color or temperature there.
Cool. Alrighty. Scrolling up, Alex, you've got Sang Che with a knight.
Yeah, not ask about anything specific, so just in general. I think it's a really nicely painted piece. I think that's not going too far and saying anything there. I think these sort of big models can be a little bit tricky to make things look cohesive on it, but you've got that down quite well. I think I really like the sort of the color palette in general. I think it looks really sort of clean. Even though it's painted to look clean in terms of the painting application. Obviously it's a bit sort of grungy, and you've got those blood splatters and things which look really cool, and I think they're executed really well. It's not sort of over the top, but you've got them there to kind of sell that story, I guess. You know, in the decal application where on the parts I think are decals, you know, those are, you know, integrated quite well. You can't really see where the decal stops and the, you know, not decal part of the surface finishes. So that's nice that it's sort of blended well, so it's not, you know, standing out obviously. And I think you could probably have a bit more integration in terms of sort of scratching and wear. You've got quite a lot of weathering over the areas that you haven't put the decals on, and then the only sort of weathering you've put on those places is these sorts of splatters and things. So it just feels a little bit like you've gone a bit further in other places, and where you're maybe not wanting to, you know, go over what you've put on, you've sort of held back a bit. So it's like, you know, you've got scratched all over the sort of main body casing at the top, and down sort of on the legs and on the shoulder pads and on the face and things. But then this side, I don't know the term there, but like, I'm going to say the side shield thing, just to the camera left of his face. You know, you've not really got any scratches on that. It feels a little bit too clean a position. Um, but I think that's, you know, just a minor thing there because you've got that nicely over the rest of it. I think the freehand over the top sells quite well. It's got quite that big sort of, you know, it feels like it's been applied well. You've sort of got the scratches over it. I think you could probably do with the way you've weathered it in places, having it maybe show some of the white paint underneath, or make it look as though it's, you know, chipped off. Because obviously in universe there would have been some paint application of the red over the white, and if you've got these deep gouges and scratches and stuff over the sort of body, you'd expect to see some of that red flaking off before the white does, and seeing some of that white coming through. Um, that's a relatively minor thing. And just on the metallics, I think they could just be popped that little bit more. But overall, I think it's a really nicely sort of painted piece. I really like something that I've just sort of gone to one of the wider shot photos as well there. And it's just reminded me, as I really like sort of the way you've got like that dust and pigment powder going up the legs as well, and sort of, and his like tabard thing to sort of bring that into the whole model as well. It just looks like a really nicely painted, cohesive piece there.
Matt, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's really striking, like that it's got this really clean white and then this like horrific blood splattering all over it, that kind of thing. So it's a super good looking piece. I think on the medals, the kind of pipe work on his shoulders could probably do with more definition through shadow, especially because it's, you know, it's quite an obvious place as part of the model. So you'd want to just spend a little bit more time on that as opposed to, you know, like the chains in under his arm, which are less visible. And I really love how the free hands down by his legs are like kind of mimicking your decals up higher up, but are a bit more like deranged, like graffiti looking stuff, as if the, you know, the followers of chaos have been painting over the legs of the knight that they can get at, which is cool. It's almost like a diorama or story element to it.
Yeah, agreed, man. I picked up on that as well. That was a really nice touch. I just had one thing to say on the blood splatter. I'm having a bit of difficulty differentiating it from the red paint on the model. It looks like you've used the same or very, very close color. So for blood splatter, I think it'd sell better if it was a lot darker, because when blood dries, it, you know, it goes more sort of a reddish brown, depending on the freshness of it, obviously. And you can't beat blood for the blood god for absolutely fresh gore. So yeah, everything else the guy said, I completely agree with. Great looking piece, man. All right, moving up. We got a slan here for you, Matt.
Yeah, very nice. So Rory TB submitted this for a competition, and yeah, looking at various things. So first of all, I'd like to say, like, fair play. You said you added an extra interest to the rocks. That's great. Like, I love how you've got like different kind of textures and different there's stuff growing on them. And it's not just grey, it's not just brown. And you've got the kind of marbly effect for the two snakes looking at each other up the top, and then the blue for the stone for the bottom of the throne. That's all like great. You could even go. This is in a jungle that could go even further. Like he's got trees growing out of him, so like you could have painted on like vines, really strong, dark green mosses or algae in places around the floating circle bits that Lord Croak has for some reason. Um, but in terms of composition, this is a very tricky model because it has these big floating bits, and generally when you see it, it has this issue of you look at it and go, I don't actually even know what this is or what I'm supposed to be looking at. Which you don't have in yours. You've got a very strong focal element using the kind of orange and yellow feathers there, and the kind of shape of them is also drawing the eye in. I'd say, unfortunately, though, it's a little bit. So the focus is on the feathers. The idea is to bring it onto Croak, but it's not because you've got like a triangle of the feathers, and it kind of makes you look down to the feathers around his head and then back up and not actually at him. So I think it'd work better if he had like glowing orange eyes, or if you could even have some like of his throat could be like an orange or a pale, you know, yellow color like a poison dart frog. They have that kind of coloration, and you could ease it off on the feathers a little bit because you have your focal point, but your focal point is like it's like a foot higher than you kind of want it to be. Um, because realistically, like when you think about it in terms of color theory, the things that draw attention are like bright colors, warm colors, and saturated colors. And the feathers are the brightest, warmest, and most saturated thing in the whole model. And you've got little bits of, in other places like the snakes and the other guy's headdress, but it's not enough to compete with that and the actual area you have in the feathers. So if you even if you broke them up a little bit, like if you had bands of brown going into the feathers, that reduce the power of them and then have the focus more. You want us to look through him, if that makes sense. So you don't want us to look like down to the top of his head and then back up. So you want to draw a line to like his chest or even to actually his base. Like if this stripe along, or if you had some of the snakes be a really bright orange color or something to make us look through him before going back up to the feathers on the top, that'd be better. But having created focus on this, which is an inherently unfocused model, is kind of 90% of the work. So fair play on that.
Yeah, nailed that feedback, man. I just had a couple of other thoughts to add to that. The this sort of statue face that's at the bottom. If you made that a very, very bright, it would have to be a pretty stunning gold or a bronze or something. But if you were to bring some of the brightness down here as well, I think that would balance it and bring the focus more towards him. But I think your idea of the bright, like poison dart throat was a cracker. Brilliant idea that. Because I think the tone on his skin is just so similar to the rest of the materials that are around it. So he's kind of a wonderful job trying to bring the focus in, but there's nothing to focus on because he's blending in so well with what's there. So yeah, putting some of those bright colours on his throat, and maybe some more fleshy kind of tones on his knees, just to bring out some bright dots that are in there. But yeah, otherwise really cleanly done, very nicely executed. Just need that little bit of focus more on him, and you'd have nailed this, man. Looks great. Alex?
No, yeah, I think honestly, I think you've both sort of covered everything there. I was just like, I really like how, like you said, Matt, those sort of like algae sort of lichen sort of looks on the stone and all that weathering. It just looks really, really interesting. And it is just that sort of the actual main character just sort of blends in with those same rocks. It may well have just been a case of trying to work in the similar colors to keep it in a cohesive palette, but it's just gone that little bit too far beyond cohesion into blending in. But yeah, just a little bit more brightness. Honestly, that poison dart frog idea just sort of that's a really good. It's made me go
Brilliant idea, wasn't
a bit disappointed. I didn't think of that.
it? Yeah. All right, cool. Cheers, Rory. Moving on up. We've got Michael Shaw with an ogre type dude thing. So saying just want some constructive CNC, so nothing in particular, so just general stuff. So I like what you've done with the skin on this guy. Those are some nice tones. It's kind of very ruddy and ogreish, and it's very believable. And I like the way that you've done the sort of the wrapping, the sort of strapping that he's got over him. Looks pretty. It's obviously bloodied. He's maybe covering a wound or something. It's maybe festering. It's filthy. Great textures on the red. Could maybe push the highlights on the ridges on that a little bit, but I like what you've done there. Let's have a look. You've got some on the back as well. So yeah, it looks like the ridges are picked out a little bit better on the back. So that's all good stuff. I did just think that the skin tones moving sort of down the arms to the hands and across the back is quite significantly darker than the knees, the feet, the belly, and the face. So I don't know if that's kind of a design preference that you've put on it, but I think this whole thing would pull together a lot better if you carried that same skin tone. His right foot, that leg there is painted really, really nicely, including the wounds and the fetid toenails and things. So I just think if you carried that across, that would just look better because it's kind of blending in at the minute with sort of the leather straps and the metals and stuff. So it's not really contrasting as well as it perhaps could. And then just a little note on the freehand. It's cool design and I like it, and it's kind of the issue that I had with it. It was kind of those kind of very sort of comic book flames have got sort of a very specific like theme behind them, and I don't really see where. It seems like quite a modern thing, if that makes sense. That kind of artwork for it, where you've got the inspiration for it, and I don't really get where he would have got that idea, if that makes sense. So, but it's quite nicely done. It's just a little bit like, where's he got that design from? But that's kind of a minor thing because it looks quite nicely done. You could maybe smooth some of it out a little bit, but it's cool design and it covers the space nicely. So well done there. And then just a note on the hair, just highlighting it that a little bit more for more structure of the hair, because it seems quite it's very uniformly highlighted and it's not showing off sort of the sheen of hair. And you could also stretch the midtones out and push the shadows a bit, like under his chin and like up under this pauldron thing, where there would be some natural shadows forming. As you can see, it's kind of uniformly highlighted and it's not really showing off the structure of the model. So yeah, just pushing a few more tones around in there could really help. Yeah, I think that's me. You guys got anything?
Yeah, I'd like to say that flames are rad. That's all. Like he learned that pattern from his awesome metal heart, and in his dreams he rides a Harley Davidson with that flame pattern on them, and I'm fine with that.
And he watches Ghost Rider.
This is it. This is where he's from. Yeah. No. And then on the something that stood out to me was that the kind of the blue stone on his that he's holding, and then the base. It's nice. I like that you have it. It's not just grey, and then you have it a bit desaturated through weather with the like sandy color added on top of it. But I think the base color of it is just a little bit too blue. Like limestone could be blue, but it's much more of a blue gray, if that makes sense. And then um, it would just because it's not meant to be really drawing attention. You want to have a cold color to contrast with the warmer colors around it. But it might be easier if you just started off with more like a French Mirage blue, if you have any idea what that is, or just one of the like gray into that blue, just so it's not so blue. Because you can see in some of the bits where you've kind of dry brushed over it, but there's some crevices where it's not, doesn't have the yellow over it, and it's like very vividly blue. And I mean that could be cool if you're going for like more of a crystal or a mystical rock kind of thing. But in a kind of a grayer, if blue, wouldn't attract attention for an element that isn't that important. And I really like the difference in the skin tones, the darker skin tone and the lighter skin tone. I do think they could be a bit more like defined in terms of where they go, especially in the back view. It kind of looks like he has a different person's leg because like the transition happens under his clothes or whatever. So if you had his elbows or something being a paler flesh tone, that would probably help it. But it's better on a big monster like this usually to have more than one like large differences in skin tone because you have such a large area to cover. So you did the right thing there.
Cool. Alrighty. Sliding on up. Alex, you're going to have fun. Because Steve's back.
With more very well painted pieces.
Yes, yes.
So just sort of generally saying you've sort of, again, haven't gone to 100%. Again, I'd like to see 100% because I don't know how much below 100% you've gone, but I feel like this is like a 99 below 100 because it's very well painted. Um,
Yeah, we're not taking another entry if it isn't 100%. Yeah.
or only if it's like 10% and we can see what like normal people paint like. Um, but no, this is just again, it's really really nice. You know, the biggest thing that sort of stood out for me is I'm glad that that's seeing the change from your last sort of big sort of Titan like this is sort of how all the iconography and the sort of decals and freehands are weathered. This time sort of well integrated. That's really really nice to see. It sort of that last time that was the one thing that to me stood out as really needing big adjustments, and now it doesn't. It just sort of all blends in. It just sort of feels really, really harmonious in that sense. I mean, I don't feel like there's too much need to be said on things like the OSL and the color palette because it is sort of another model in this same scheme that you had last time. So we've already sort of all talked about how much we like the color scheme and the balance and the composition and how it all really works and how your OSL is really nice. So I'm trying to think of sort of going for other things that we didn't mention before. You mentioned about changing the red lenses. I don't think you need to. I think that red in there, it pops out just enough to sort of pull the eye in. You've got a lot of red around the model in the sort of different sort of icons and sort of images over it, whether some are freehand or decals, I don't know. But it pulls that color in. It doesn't seem too jarring, and it helps where you've got a lot of that blue to bring the focus in. If you're feeling that it's not quite enough or not visible enough, or if you just plain don't like it, fair enough. It's your model, change it. But if it's that you're feeling it's not popping out enough, you can maybe just make it a little bit more saturated, or maybe have a bit more of an OSL effect going around there. I really think it's a really nice model. Really well painted, really clean. Another thing that sort of stood out to me was one of the icons you got on there. I'm trying to find it's the image that's zoomed right in on like the plasma coils. You can sort of see where that sort of skull and the sort of wheel icon is. That's the one place where I could see immediately. That's a decal you've applied. Just because it feels a little bit less integrated, you can see where that border between the decal is like almost like sort of frosted out a little bit. I've not really used decals before. I don't really know what the solution would be for that. But even if it's just sort of painting in where that little bit of frosting is, just with that underneath color, if there's no way to make it sort of perfectly clear, just to sort of cover over it and sort of tidy up the edges, so to speak. But besides that, honestly, I think it's a really, really nice piece. I really like sort of all the little bits of text you've got in there as well on the blue panels. But no, I honestly, I think there's not too much to be said on this one. Besides, well done.
Yeah, completely agree, man. One way you can get the decals to integrate better is hit it with gloss varnish first, and then hit it with matte varnish, and that should get rid of the kind of edging to it. That guy said. Firstly, secondly, the only pushback I really would have, because this thing is beautiful, this kind of the upper parts of the legs is looking a little underweathered compared to how much other damage he's taken. There is some stuff there, but it's nowhere near as obvious. It's a lot more subtle. You've got some kind of verdigris happening around the bolts or something. It looks like you've stippled some variation in there, but some dense scratches streaking on the legs, I think, would be pretty much it as far as I'm concerned, to make it any better. So wonderful stuff. Well done, Steve. It's always a pleasure. Matt, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think not huge amount of room for improvement here on terms of execution. One thing that kind of stood out at me, particularly in the first photo, yeah, the very first one. Like I love the stance, but there's something like so his left leg. If a person was standing like this, their left knee would rotate out more, which you probably can't do on this kit. And also, it's a robot, so it can kind of pivot independently. But it still looks a little bit off to us that it's because it's a humanoid robot. that it's standing with its legs facing completely kind of 90 degrees to its own right. So if there was some way, obviously you're not going to do this in the moment, but just in general, just thinking about if you could like turn the shin more towards where the gun is going, and that'd give also the kind of sensation that it's braced and ready to take that shot. Whereas subconsciously, we know from looking at this, he doesn't have any kind of stability in that direction. He'd get knocked over by it because of the way he's standing. And then also something it kind of occurred to me looking at a bunch of these things. People should have more big giant robots walking around. Should like wreck the place up. So like he's standing on this little ledge thing. It'd be cool if he was like crushing that because the weight of him, like there's no way it's going to support him. I don't know if they have anti-grav generators or whatever, but that'd be a cool thing if you're looking for inspiration in your future work going forward to have like show that they're so heavy they're actually destroying the ground they walk upon. Might be something to do. It's an addition. It's not an improvement because, as we said, there's very little room for improvement here.
Yeah,
Great work.
We're clutching at straws, Steve. God damn. But yeah, 100% next time. Come on, let's see it. Right. You're up next then, Matt, and you've got your buddies.
Yeah,
Please.
Paddy with his giant dragon. This is a creature caster. They're known for making like outsized models that fit on a ridiculous base for gaming. But this one isn't for a game, and they specifically designed this dragon so it fits on, those IKEA shelves
Mm.
that everyone has their models on? That's how big it is. It's the height of one of those shelves.
Jesus.
So yeah, it's pretty serious stuff. His question was, does the orange go too far? Where is it? Go too far in the orange on the face? And my answer would be no. If anything, you could go further on the orange of the face, and then bring it up to like white in places, particularly around the face, and then I would bring the hand and the knee and maybe like some spots on the wing in a kind of circle around the face up to the level where you have it now, so that the face is still the brightest thing. And you might even want to think about if you're doing this kind of thing again. On the horns, you could reverse the direction of the shading because it's darkest at the bottom and lightest at the top. Whereas at the face, it might be better to have the horns be light at the bottom and then dark towards the top to draw more attention in there. Because with these big models, like the whole thing is what bits are we meant to be looking at here? And the focus here is on the face, but I think you could definitely go further if you were so inclined. Do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, just in terms of because it is such a big model, and it's pretty much all it's not like a human figure that's broken up with like clothes and things. It's pretty much all the one flesh. It kind of reads a little bit sort of samey everywhere. You've got a little bit of sort of purples worked into the red, but just some more color variation throughout the colors that they are. So that could be, working some more sort of purple and orange tones in, like you said, but sort of a bit further away from the face, and the blue can again have those sorts of purple tones or maybe some sort of yellow tones in there, and sort of just something to make it a little bit less. The red is red, the blue is blue, and things like that. But these sorts of big models are really tricky to play with. There's a lot going on, and these creature cast models as well. They're really sort of detailed. So picking all of that out and keeping it really interesting is hard. So I think just in general the paintings, it's nice and clean, and the color scheme sort of works. It could just go that little bit more in terms of sort of bringing up the contrast a bit and bringing up that color variation.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Oh, actually, just before moving on, I'd like to say I like how you picked out the sinews kind of showing through the skin in a bunch of places. There's bits where the sinews are running through the wings, and then it goes to exposed like sinew, and then back under the skin, and that's a really cool.
Yeah, I picked that out as well. I don't think I've seen that before, where the bone comes out of the winging back in again.
Yeah,
It's cool. Like it. And yeah, what you're saying about the scale of just noting the size of a space marine next to it, looking like Ant-Man, frankly. So yeah, nice one. Moving up, we've got Mike Frydog. Finishes for a friend. He's mostly legally blind, so I get a lot of freedom to do what I want. and always go for an eye grab if possible. Mission accomplished, dude. Mission accomplished. This is an eye grab. Pretty pleased with how it came out. Tough piece due to sharp bits. Right, cool. So wow, what a riot, man. So this is really nicely put together. I think it is obviously a kind of a rainbow palette, and I think you've done a really nice job with it. It feels quite balanced out. There's just a couple of bits that stand out as needing the same amount of love as the rest of it. So the first thing I wanted to point to was the silver parts. They look a little bit like on this headpiece here. There's a lot of recesses and deep areas there that could definitely go a lot darker. And there's only kind of 2 tones of silver in there, so just picking out the highlights and deepening the shadows on the silver parts. That's the same across the whole thing, really. I'm just using the face as an example because it's so close up. The color transitions in all of the the main body and the feather and stuff are really, really beautiful. Really nicely done. So congratulations on that. And also the details that you've put in the big feathers, but didn't go that far on the smaller ones. So if we zoom in like to the smaller shaped feathers, just picking out the edges on those. I mean, going in there and hashing it like the big ones is probably perhaps a step too far, unless you were going for a GD award or something. But just picking them out a little bit more with edge highlights would be really, really nice. And then also just pushing shadows and just structuring the wing a little bit more, because there doesn't seem to be much volumetric highlighting happening on the piece in general. You can see it a little bit on the underside of this wing. This looks a lot better. Look how you've got this, this shadow moving up into the previous layer of feathers. So what's happening on the underside of this wing is, really, really gorgeous. But just don't see that same level of attention on sort of the underside of this wing or on his body as well. This area under the ribs would be really shadowed. Looks like you've put some in here on this neck, which is cool. But then if we zoom out on this a little bit, up in the undersides of legs and stuff, and under this bit here, that would probably be a bit more shadowed. Love what you did with the staff head. That looks gorgeous. Absolutely stunning. Love the use of colours and the way you've highlighted that, and the sort of the glowing centre. And you've sold the effect really nicely as well, that it's drawing power from these crystals. If I can get a better shot of the base, there we go, that's better. How it's kind of drawing the energy into the butt of the staff, and then things are heating up as it gets to the top, and then boof, you've got the power coming out of it. I would dare to say though that these crystals on the base haven't been painted yet. So if that's not the case, then I'm sorry, but it looks like they're not painted at the minute. So if you were to get some paint on there to bring it more in tone with the energy that's coming into the middle, into the bottom of the staff, I think that would really help. But yeah, I think this thing overall is pretty damn stunning. Very, very eye catching. Well balanced. Just push those shadows, volumetric highlighting, and just make those crystals a little bit more plausible. So yeah, there you go, Mike. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's really bold the way you've kind of gone. I am deciding what parts of this model are rainbow colored, and I don't care what they are. I'm doing it the way I want. Like his sword has the whole rainbow thing, and you're like, that's awesome. Never would have thought of that. So fair play. And also how often these things like a rainbow scheme is inherently very difficult to pull off without looking like a complete riot. Well, he wouldn't look like a complete riot, but I think the fact that you have blue being a really big area of it works super well because we think, where do you see a rainbow? In the sky. The sky is blue. So we automatically were like, okay, that tracks. Whereas if the colors were evenly distributed, it would look like a complete mess. Also, just on the base, there's a couple of rocks that definitely have been painted. And yeah, they just like a little bit of wash, whatever. It's not much, but they just stand out because actually the green painted base looks really, really good. And then like under his foot, there's the rock, and it's obvious it has a very different finish from everything else. Which I'm sure like it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. No one's looking for that, but it's just for yourself as a note. Great work.
Alrighty. Nice one, Mike. Let's move on up. So, Alex, you've got Jacob Schultz's Oink Shaman.
I think this is it's quite a cool model. I mean, I like the OSL in particular. I think it sells quite well. I really like that sort of blue glowy. I think my issue with that though is that it's really the only place that blue appears on the model. So despite it being a really really nice effect, and you sold it well, you painted the flame in that sort of hot magic looking way, and the glow sort of sells quite well as a glow. It draws too much to the attention for me. That's as soon as I look at the model, the photo, that's where my eye goes. In your sort of extra photo in the comments there, where that's not as visible in the view, the model feels a lot more cohesive. It feels a lot more sort of well balanced. Sort of the eye tracks across it in a more sort of natural way, sort of jumping around between the face and the hands and sort of the clothes and things. And you just sort of look all around, but just with that blue there, it's just a little bit too much. It's got this sort of nice sort of yellow orangey tone in the skin tone, so there's your highlights there. So that could work as well as your glow instead, or just finding somewhere else to put that blue into the model, just to sort of balance it off. But away from that, I think the flesh tones are nice. I think the muscles are a little bit highlighted slightly too sort of middle-ish, if that makes sense, in that rather than putting the highlights to the top of the muscles, where it would get the most light from a top-down light, which looks to be what you've gone for with like the hair and the cloth and stuff. You sort of highlighted them in the part that's the most forward, which feels a little bit sort of off. Sort of on his sort of stomach, for example, you've got almost like a darker patch, not like a shadow dark, but like a mid-tone sort of color, just running across the top of that sort of muscle shape, where you'd expect to see the maximum highlight. So they just feel a little bit sort of unnaturally placed, almost as though the light's in front, and the hair feels a little bit like it's lacking in that shininess. I like the color of it. It does have some of that blue in it. So that blue in the glow isn't completely alien. It's just too bright for what you've got elsewhere. But it's not got that sort of sheen to it that you might expect. Hair is a very very reflective surface. No, I like sort of generally what we've got going here. I think the metallics on the staff could be a bit brighter, but it kind of works with the sort of look that you've got going, so I don't think that's too much of an issue. And I actually really, really like the white you've got on the little tabard cloth. It's quite a hard thing to pull off, a nice clean looking white. It's a colour that a lot of people struggle with painting, but I think you've got it, quite nicely there.
Yeah, I'd agree, man. I just wanted to congratulate you on the red cloth, mainly. I think that's probably the biggest success. The skin, great tones in it and great variation as well of the volumetric stuff. But as Alex said, yeah, having that highlight, if you look at some of the best flesh painted models, they always have a highlight goes right up to the bottom of the next muscle. So just placing that differently would nail it. And I just think the face could be a little bit brighter, but it's kind of a minor thing. My eyes drawn between the blue fire and the orange belly, so I think you've just intensified, resaturated the face, pushed the highlights a little bit further, then your focus will be in the right place on the body. But yeah, the blue fire is a big distraction at the minute. But otherwise, yeah, nicely done, man. Love that red cloth. It's great. Matt?
Yeah, I think the cloth great and the skin tone, like the color selection's really good. Like they're very interesting. Very like not like, oh, it's not just a red cloak. It's got a lot more going with it. And I'd agree that the face could have a bit more highlight. Going up to like a white, especially across his nose, where like it's a bit like a bit of a sheen of sweat or whatever on it. And then actually have darker shadows around the eyes, because that would make the eyes stand out. Like you got a nice bright eye that's yellow, but because the skin around it is kind of a fairly lightest orange, it doesn't really stand out. And I think for the model, you could look up pig's eyes for references if you wanted to. but just to make more of a focus point on the face there. But yeah, it's great model. Other than those little things.
Cool. Cheers, Jacob. And Matt's got a Stonehorn to review.
Yeah, Bartov.
Bartov.
Cool. So he was looking at the texture for the fur. I think that was the main thing. Put a lot of time into it with oils, which is cool. And I think in terms of the fur, like it's definitely like successful. The orange fur, this is what I'm talking about. Like we can see the texture in the legs and everything. And it definitely reads as like this is a furry, woolly beast, and it's a lot more interesting. Like it's more interesting than the box art, I've got to say, for this particular model. So that's definitely a success for me. Um, I think the horns are also great, and the face of the beast. The beast generally looks better, the Stonehorn, than the rider. I think that I don't know how intentional that is. I believe in the game, it's like Stonehorn with a guy on it. Like it's the monster is the important bit, but the rider could have a little bit more interest to him, or just to be a little bit less kind of um desaturated, I suppose. Particularly like he's got nice. I love the weather on his spear, and but he's got a lot of these kind of like orange and neutral colors on him, and his face is this kind of purpley thing with the helmet. So if you had a bright element somewhere on him to give us a focal point, because he's kind of like fading into the chair he's sitting on and stuff. Uh, but only again from certain viewpoints. So again, that's a trick with these big models. Um, and the pennant he has is really nice. I really love the kind of sheen on it. It seems a little bit at odds with the rest of the model though, in that it looks like it's like a knight's pennant and it's kind of perfectly preserved and everything, whereas the model itself is much more grimy. I don't know if it's like meant to be captured from another army or something like that. If you had some of that blue somewhere else, like I don't know, in like if you had like a necklace that was in that, that might draw more attention into the rider as well. Um, but in terms of the texture on the fur and the beast itself, I think it's a roaring success. Pardon my pun.
That was deliberate, wasn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. I think the surfaces on the horns facing up could be a bit brighter to contrast from the underneath sides, just to create that kind of volumetric element to it. And then rider fading into chair, awesome point. So if you sort of varied the bones that are on the chair, that could really help. Or indeed, I mean, I love the pattern that you've put on the shawl. What is it? It's like a pelt, isn't it? It's a really great patterning, but it's just a little bit too similar to the shield and the horns that are around it in the chair. So just varying something up there. You could have made that like a tiger pelt to kind of tie it in with the beastie's fur. That'd be pretty straightforward to do, I think, because the patterning's pretty similar already. It's kind of like a white tiger he's got anyway. So yeah, but really, really nice, cleanly done. Texturing is really brilliant. So well done there, and yeah, execution overall is really, really great. Love the rusted metals too, man. They look good. Alex?
Yeah, no, there's not too much that you haven't already. I was going to mention the pelt there, actually, the sort of patterning on it, because I think it's really those sorts of fur kind of stripe sort of patterns can be quite hard sometimes to pull off and make look natural. It's one of those cases of the actual fur patterns are quite randomly done on animals, but the human brain doesn't like to paint things random. It likes to make things look really nice and ordered. But you've got it looking really natural there. It sells as an actual sort of fur pattern. So that's really, really nice there. But besides that, I think everything that's already been mentioned is pretty much covering everything.
Sweet. Cool. Cheers, Bartos. So next is June BG with a great, ghastly, rotten thing. Commission piece did for a friend. Nice. Most proud of this one, but don't spare the feelings. Everything is appreciated. So starting off with the guts and grime. So really like the grievous wounds, the openings, the drippings, the gore, the slickness of it. All looks repulsive and disgusting, and therefore great success. The pustules are also very nicely picked out. You could maybe make them a little bit more luminous. Some of them on the back are kind of, steering more into the orange. So I think if you resaturated, some of the other ones are around. But then again, it could be like a nice variation. Some are more severe than others. So yeah, maybe not. With the skin, it looks like some volumetric highlighting has been done. So if you look at like the tops of his hands across the shoulders, there's a really nice kind of light line going across the top of it. So that's really good. I just would expect a little bit on this leg at the back. That seems to be very, very similar to, the folds of underneath the back flab and underneath his leg as well. So I think it's a case of deepening the shadows as opposed to, lightening the top of the leg. But everything from kind of the middle of the back down is quite samey. And I think the answer there would be deepening the shadows and underneath him as well. He's huge, so we cast very aggressive shadows. But yeah, it's good variation, but just go a little bit more. Love this grizzly tentacle thing coming out of his shoulder. That looks rank. Nice. A little bit of texturing to the purple cloth would be nice to see. There's got some variation in highlights and shadows, which is cool, but just he's pretty massive, so you would see that. And also dirtying it up a bit. It's a little bit clean, like I'm looking at the rear loincloth here, guys, and it's like I'd expect to see a bit of rust on that chainmail, which is in turn affecting the cloth that's over it, because it looks like it's been there a damn long time. So yeah, just filthying up the fabrics would be really, really nice. And then I really like what you did with the face, keeping it kind of the brightest yellow on it for the eyes and putting a bit of the glow on the fabric. That's a really, really nice touch. So well done there. I just would have put a little bit more love into the horns just to bring the focus in a little bit. So Matt mentioned it previously, making the ends of the horn darker is a really good way to do that. So the eyes drawn through the highlight up into the face, and you've obviously got these three in a sort of triangle format anyway, so the model's really helping you out anyway, but just exaggerating that, you'll be on fire with it. And then just a little bit more highlights on the very top of his head. It might be there, but kind of the purple's quite desaturated, so yeah, a little bit more hue variation in the midtones, maybe coming down, just to show that is specifically more bright on the top. And then missed opportunity for me would be a bit more plaque on the teeth. They look a bit too clean. There's a bit of variation there, but go further with some more browns. And then more grisly toenails, yellowy, browny, minging disgustingness on the toenails. One of the most repulsive things about horrible monsters is the feet, I find. And you've got a really rancid foot that, might just be me, but I think Matt's in a similar boat by the look on your face at the minute. But yeah, repugnating the toenails would really set it off, man. But he's grim and disgusting, and therefore very, very good. Well done, June. Anyone else?
Yeah, just on the for me again, it's just that a bit like what you were saying about the horns, is that it's or about the teeth, but about the horns instead as well. That it's a very bright white. It could be a bit sort of because you've got that sort of wooden thing in his hand. You can bring those brown tones in there and those sort of slightly orangey tones, and it'll balance itself. There's a lot going on there that'll really sort of just take that a little bit further, and it'll be just really, really nice. It just feels too clean for me, like you were saying, Jim. It's just that little bit. It's Nurgle. It's the one time where you can put as much grime and dirt on a model and sort of nastiness. And if anyone says, "Oh, that's a bit too dirty," you just say, "No, it's not. It's Nurgle." You can do whatever you want, and it feels like you've just held back on that a little bit too much to make it sort of read as the purple is purple cloth, the skin is greenish skin, the horns are a sort of white horn, the teeth are white. It feels like you've sort of gone down a checklist and gone this material, this color, this material, this color, and haven't sort of then brought that all together with an overall sort of theme of what the model is, not just what the pieces of the model are. But what you have painted there is it's really cleanly done. It's really sort of a nice sort of selling. I really like the scheme as well, sort of getting that green and sort of red balance with it's a contrasting colours, and it's got that scheme. You've got the sort of a lot more green than the red, which works, but you've also kept them both what they are, relatively desaturated, so they don't sort of give that Christmassy vibe too much, which can often be a trap that people fall into with reds and greens. So that works really nicely. And the only other thing is, I quite like to see a base on there rather than just sort of on the little gaming disc. But that's that's more of a, some people don't like bases or whatever. That's a personal preference to an extent. But even just a bit of a texturing paste on there, just to kind of give a little bit more of the environment that he's in, would be quite nice to see there.
Yeah, only weird people don't like bases.
Don't be that guy.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the color on this guy's great. It's a really interesting variation. Normally he's done it in kind of a warm green, where he's got this really cold green, which contrasts much better with the red and the yellow pustules as well. And I really like how the skin tone fades into a more pinky hue up near the mouth in his belly and the tentacles, where it's morphing into more gross stuff. I think you could have a little bit more of that in the back, because the back view is relatively less interesting, but he's still got all these gouges and rents, and you could have the kind of more pink hue showing through there. And you could also just add bits, be like, oh, he's got bed sores around his thighs or whatever, just to make it more interesting, because, it's your model, you paid it whatever you want. It doesn't matter what it's notionally meant to be. You can add whatever details you like on there.
Cool. Cheers, June. Thanks for submitting. Let's move up then to Daniel Pizza. Alex.
First time doing a sort of a non-clean style here, as you've called it, and not really done dirt or grime before. I don't think it necessarily comes across that way. I think the sort of weathering is quite nice. I think you've got that place where it's so you've got quite a lot of it there, but it doesn't feel like it's too much. It feels like you've gone right up to the edge of what would be too much, and then pulled back a bit into what's a really, really nice way to sell something is really dirty and grimy without it looking over the top. So I think that's really nice, sort of in the balance there. I quite like the rust streaking and things. It looks really believable. Outside of that, you've got sort of just generally cleanly applied paint. I think your scratches and things sort of work well as well. I really like how you've worked the sort of skull and wheel iconography there, the little decal, into all of the rest of the model behind it with the scratches and things over it. It sort of really helps it to sell well as part of the model and weathered as well. It's a common pitfall of people not really, doing anything with the decals once they're there, but painting over decals is part of the process of applying a decal as far as I'm concerned. So that's really nice, and more than just you've scratched onto it, you've applied levels of that. So you've got some of it's just scratching the black paint off of where you've got the white, some of it's going down all the way through to the red, some of it's going below that sort of bluish white color beneath it. So you've got those levels of intensity, which is another thing that people often just sort of do black line and then a little white highlight on the bottom of it for a scratch, whereas you've got that, it shows that there's levels of in-universe paint on there that you've sort of taken up to really, really well. The thing for me that sort of stands out is that the rust and sort of grime is all kind of one color. In things like that where you've got sort of rust streaks and things, you'd expect to see some dark browns and then some red, sort of orange browns and some brighter oranges, depending on sort of the age of the rust. And sort of, you've got that deep oxidation and then those sort of newer, sort of very bright, almost sort of orange sort of rusts that you want to see streaking there as well. Sort of more towards the middle and thin streaks down those darker ones, just to sell that bit of sort of variation there. And in a few of the ridges where you've got rust, it feels like you've put rust there because it's a ridge between two panels, and that's where rust goes. But you haven't gone sort of beyond that. In that, say, this little I don't know what you'll call that, the eye hole thing at the front. You've got sort of an even layer of rust sort of around the ridge where the recess where that sort of connects to the main body, which isn't really how rust would apply. You get a little bit of rusting in the top right in that sort of crevice there where the water would settle. It wouldn't spread out as far as you've got it spreading there. In the same way that underneath, water doesn't really collect on the underside of a ridge, where it can't collect in this spot of the ridge. So while you've got so much rust there, it just feels a little bit out of place to me. But besides that, that's just sort of little things that it you say it's your first time doing Rust and stuff. That makes sense that these little bits where they're things that you pick up on as you go and sort of get a better feel for it. Looking at reference pictures is really, really good, so you can see the way that the colors change as the age of the rust changes and the way that rust settles. But no, I think in general, I think it's really nice. I especially like the way you've got the sort of weathering on the base as well. It's not just the model. It's not just a rusty model in a nice sort of really clean environment that you see sometimes. It's a grungy environment just as much as it's a grungy model, which is nice to see as well. So no, overall, I think it's quite a nice attempt there. Oh, and just one other thing while I remember it is you've got lots of rust and weathering on sort of the body and things, and then the metal on the legs feels a bit lacking in there. Whether it's more rust in the joints there, or some oil slick, or anything there, it would be nice to just see a little bit more there as well. But yeah, if anyone else has got anything on that?
Oh, no, I think you nailed it on the weathering. I just thought that with all the weathering, and it is quite a lot, I think you've just lost an element of separation between all the panels and stuff that's kind of been filled with the rust. But you still need to go back in and reinforce where the deep shadows would be, where you wouldn't even see the rust because it's so shaded. So yeah, just a little bit. I mean, I say a little bit. There's a lot because there's a lot of panel lines and hatches and bolts and things. So it would be work. But yeah, I think that would help separate it, and that would kind of break up the rust a little bit and make it a little bit more believable. And then the only other thing I'd say really is if it's this badly weathered, then more dents, more scratches, more paint flaking off. The shin pads, there's no damage, there's no bullet holes, scratches, or peeling or anything. It's just it's like it's been made, left outside for 50 years, and the rain's got to it. That's kind of That's kind of the level of weathering that it looks. It doesn't look like it's battle worn to me. It just looks like it's neglected. But yeah, for a first attempt, man, it's a lot better than my first attempt at weathering. So yeah, nice, Matt.
Yeah, you're very comprehensive. This is another one of the models where I thought it'd be cool to see some dents and holes in the base from where it was walking, because like it's
Mm.
got pincer feet. Like there's no way they're not gonna leave some marks. You could just have like two or three, just and you, like coming from the direction where it was walking in. It'd just be a kind of a nice little touch. The weathering all looks great to me. It's kind of it reminds me of Star Wars a little bit, like, because it's all white and then it's got the griminess added to it. So yeah, good job. And the yeah, good shade. Like on the weathering on white can be quite difficult, but it's you've done a really good job on it.
Cool. Alrighty. Moving on up. So Matt's got Adam Story's Shaman Troll Tang, which definitely counts as a monster. So
Yeah, why not? Cool. This is really nice model. I love the color palette. Reminds me of some story I read as a kid about a dragon, and he was green and he had blue, green and purple and blue. It's really kind of wistful colors. I like how you've used a little bit of like pink and flesh down into the like nose and knees and elbows and stuff. I think you could do a little bit more. You could make the nose a bit brighter again because it's red. I like go up to red in it, and then the knuckles. It's a bit weird that the knuckles, like these knuckles, have lighter skin, but then these knuckles don't at all. So you could carry that through onto them as well. Um, one element for improvements definitely. There's a couple of places you can really see it in your photos. For in terms of paint cleanliness, there's like bits of the blue have gotten up onto the skin of his ear and things, and onto the gold of the trinkets uh in his beard. And then I think there's bits of the green skin have gotten onto kind of like places where just generally all of the adjoining places you want to watch out that if you've accidentally touched one area with the color of another one, just to go back over it in your base color and even it out. And taking pictures of your models is a great way to keep you honest on that, because you often miss them and then you look at it and go, oh, there's just a whole streak on there that I added afterwards by accident with a flick of the brush or whatever. And then the horns that are poking out of his kind of roby thing or furry cloak on the back, I think they could have some sort of gradient, particularly going darker, so they look like they're going into, like protruding out of the woolly furry stuff. Because at the moment they look a little bit like they're sitting on top of it, which is obviously not what it's meant to be like. I think the face looks good. You've got a nice gradient on the tusks of the face as well. If you had the space for it, you could add a little life dot, like reflection, into one or both of the eyes, and even like a waterline, which is where like your tears collect in under your eye. So just like a little dot on the bottom of the eyelid, bottom eyelid is also a great look, and it draws an awful lot of attention and makes it a lot more lively looking for a really really small detail. Um, but otherwise, it's a great model. Thanks for submitting it. You guys have anything you want to mention?
Nah, you hit all my points, man. Alex?
No, the same thing. I was just going to say, the sort of green to pink transition on his nose is just really clean, and that was the only thing I was thinking while looking at the photos now as well. But besides that, I think you've covered everything.
Cool.
Top marks for Matt then. Cheers, Adam. Moving on to Costas with his take on a Telemon Heavy Dread. Everything went smooth. Gold, burnt umber ink in recesses. I repainted it 3 times. Geez, only 3? God, you're good. So yeah, any comments or tips would be welcome. So really nice scheme on this. I really like how you've painted the armor. Like the lighting on it is quite believable. So nice work there. Good sort of gradients on the red as well. It's not too over contrasted, if that makes sense. These, they have got some shading on it, and it's gentle, but it's there. So it's not it's quite easy to overdo it, I think, with red armor. But I think this red armor is done really, really nicely. So the areas that I thought could be improved a little bit was the weathering that's on it. There is some stuff there, but it's very, very subtle, so it doesn't like bite out at you. And something of this type and size, these scratches would be seemingly a lot deeper. But it's also it's only scratches on it, so putting bullet holes or dents or something like that, flaking paints, would be a nice variation, because everything's it's the same type and it's a very, very similar size. So yeah, having darker lines and then brighter, super, super bright glint reflection underneath the damage, just to really pop those out, because it's nice that they're there, but they're just not as obvious as they could or should be. There's also no weathering on the red whatsoever, which not terribly believable. So adding a little bit there would be a great addition. Really like what you did with the OSL on the body. I think that sells really, really nicely. So you haven't overdone that at all, and the way it's reflecting off the gun itself is nice. Just a little bit more of a shadow line as the glow comes down the barrel. So you could put, if there's a darker band of shadow going down the barrel towards the end of the gun, it's better going up towards the gun because it's kind of naturally in shadow anyway. But yeah, just adding that extra shadow band before you get into the normal lighting of the barrel would be great. And then just slightly hotting up the source a little bit, so it looks better in this picture here. This really, really bright white hotspot on it. But then if we look at the other angle from the front, it's not as bright. So just carrying that attention to detail over into the other sides of the coils would really, really help. Oh, there we go. It's really easy to see now. If I flick between those three, yes, not so good. So yeah, just bringing that up a bit. But yeah, great scheme. I like the way you brought the kind of the textures. Sorry, not textures. What they call the kind of dusting and stuff up onto the feet. So that's selling nicely. That looks cool. So yeah, I think this guy looks great, man. Just pick out the weathering a little bit more. Increase the OSL and a few extra shadows around the glow. And maybe make the eyes a little bit brighter. That was the last thing I wanted to say, because the gun's kind of the brightest thing on it. So the focus is kind of drawn down here a little bit too much. You've done the right thing in putting it in there. But it would be nice if it doesn't really look like there's a huge opportunity to get the blue anywhere else, really. It would look a bit forced. But yeah, you kind of want a triangle of the colours, or a square or a line or something. So you've got very, very big blue, bright blue bit over here, little bit in here. So yeah, you need to make these super duper bright to really bring the attention back to the face. But the way you've shaded the panels and got the chest highlight right in the middle there, really, really bright, is all good. So nice one on that. So yeah, cheers, Costas. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think the gold is really impressive, to be honest with you, considering how much of the model is gold. These, I don't know, these are like the super Earth Space Marines or whatever, where everything's gold, and often it can be kind of mad, to be honest with you, looking, because it's just all one kind of thing. Whereas you've got a really good level of shading and contrast that's making it interesting to look at. Um, without having to break it up too much. You could break it up a little bit more if you wanted to make your life easier to do like those weird like tubey bits on his legs could be black or like blackened steel instead of gold. Or and then the little missiles sticking out the top of his thing, they could be painted rather than being gold as well if you wanted. And then if you want to draw more attention to the head, you could do like an internal lighting thing, like everyone does Abaddon with that, where he's like got a light behind his head that lights up the top of his head panel thing. On the paint, the only thing that I'd suggest for improvement in technical terms is the base doesn't have. So the base has less shadow on it than the model, if that makes sense. So like his feet don't have shadows under them on the base, but his arms have shadows under them on him, and it just looks a little bit weird. I'd say you probably might have painted them separately and then done a little bit afterwards, but you should try to have like it looks like they're in a different environment. So just a little bit more deeper shadow on the base would kind of make it look a little bit more natural with like pretty minimal effort, to be honest with you. Be my note.
Cool. Alrighty, moving up. We got fighting dice with the Bane Blade, Alex.
Yeah, so just not really specifically asking for anything specific, just sort of generally. The first thing is that your photos are quite dark, so it's not the easiest to tell what's going on in a lot of places. So if you just get a little bit more light in there, it would help to just make the photos a little bit easier. But going with what we can see, it's a very there's a lot going on in this model. So I think that's the easiest way to sort of say that is you've got a lot of things happening. But you've kept it quite cohesive, despite that. You know, there's a lot of different elements to it, but it doesn't sort of read as chaotic and disparate and all of those loads of different things sort of going on, just because you've kept the color scheme quite tight, which is a really sort of apt choice there. It works really, really nicely to sort of keep it from being sort of too striking to the eye and making you go, whoa, that's a lot, which is really nice. I think that the sort of application of the paint is quite clean. I can't sort of easily find too many places where you've got sort of overspill of the paint. There's one or two little places where it looks like it's just the tiniest little bit of overspilling, but you know, for the most part, it's really, really nice and clean, which is always nice. In terms of sort of the weathering and things, I think that works well. It's not overdone. You've kept it sort of to the point where you could easily go more and get away with it without it looking too much. But the level you've kept at is sort of consistent. There's no place that's been sort of weathered enormously more than others, or place that feels like it's been left out of the weathering too much, which is nice. And again, I think the biggest sort of thing for me on this is just how, you know, with how big it is, that there is, although you've kept it from looking too chaotic, there doesn't feel like there's too much. There's a point that's specifically focused on. I think with these sorts of big sort of tanks and machines, and you've got all this sort of crane thing as well. I don't know if that's I don't know the model. I don't know if that's something you've added on or what. But it's, you know, there's too much to go on for that to be a focal point. An easy focal point, I think, just in terms of the actual sculpt itself. So that's not the biggest issue. It's not as though you've missed the obvious focal point, like when some people sort of make it so that the face isn't, you know, focal on a sort of human figure. But it feels like I've got nowhere. My eye doesn't have anywhere to settle on here. In each picture you've got of it, my eye just settles on whichever part has the best lighting rather than any specific area, which feels like that I don't know what the solution is to that. It's a very busy model, but just something to sort of consider on any more big models you do in the future. But yeah, no, I think it's really nice to paint. I like all the little bits of freehand you've got dotted around as well, sort of little sort of icons and bits of graffiti and stuff sort of written all over it. I think that's quite a cool idea for it. But if anyone's got anything else to say?
No, I think you struggle with, you know, the focal point, but huge, great big thing as part of an army. I don't think it's a huge problem that there's not really anywhere for the eye to settle. It is the whole thing. I think is just eye catching because it's so big, it's so varied, and I love the little details like the name that's on the tank, whatever this is. Tiny little details picked out really nicely. I think the Gene Stealers that are driving it stand out with the pink heads and the green and the green armor. So I think it's a massive success, man. For what it is, it's so huge. It's part of an army. I'm guessing this thing is for tabletop. So amazing looking piece. Well done, man. Looks great. Cool conversion, Matt.
Yeah, it's classic because it's basically it's like a mobile diorama.
Yeah.
Effectively, like it's like a bunch of dudes wandering around this weapons platform, and they've all got their jobs, and they've all got their stuff. I think the hazard stripes and the drill thingy are really, really well done and look great. You could have some more of them on like other places if you wanted to break up the area of it more, but it's not super necessary. Or you could think about as well, it has lights on it, so maybe you could have deliberately light up certain areas if you're doing another one to be like, oh, they're gonna fire the drill, so they'll light up the actual lights around the drill so it's a bit brighter or whatever. But again, like there is no focal point. It's like a giant. It's like I don't know, a small town of destruction rolling around the place, and it looks great.
Yeah, nice one, guys. Very, very nice piece of work. Right, Matt, you get to review my favourite model ever created.
Well, there you go. The
Llama Kitty. The Llama Kitty. Yeah.
Cool. So Mike Kaufman is taking the Mind Stealers ranks, looking for display/competition level. Any CC would be greatly appreciated. Anything you specifically focus on for improvement. All right, cool. So this is an exceptionally nice piece of work here on this model. It's a good model, and this is I'd say this is my favorite version of it I've seen so far. Especially the face. Like if you're entering in a competition, it's got a competition winning face. I would say.
Yes.
Like there's plenty of things the judge will just look at and go, cool, it's gonna make the cut or gonna be placed or whatever. It's got a really great color choices. The contrast is really good. I love how you have that differentiation of texture where the rough bits of the horns aren't as shiny and then it goes to this really shiny point where it's nice and smooth. That's class. And the non-metallic gold looks good, and to have the kind of glowing gold in the eyes is like an additional kind of touch of your own character brought to it, and that's great. So again, when we talk about a competition piece, it's kind of the real question is what competition is it and what are they looking for? So there's many competitions where they look at that and go, taking the best bit of the model, this is super high standard and it's really good. Other competitions they're a bit more negative and they'd be looking for what to detract from you, and then as well if it's tiebreaker situation, you want to make sure that you've covered everything to a kind of minimal standard as well. But for display, it's spot on because people look at the face, and it's hard to look away from because you've got such good contrast on it. The body's really good. I love the texture of the fur; that came out extremely well. I think on the tail, it could be a little bit subtler. You could have smaller. So the fur on a cat's tail is actually shorter than on the Reddit's body, and it doesn't part down the middle like that. It just goes in the direction of the tail. So that'd be just a minor improvement for there. I think all of the things for me that I think you can improve on kind of stylistically here are really in the base. Or the most obvious ones, because you've got the Necron dude there. And I'm not 100% sure it's like a diorama. You got two whole models, but what's the story here? Is it is the Llama Cat after tearing him, killing him, or is it his ally? They've got this Egyptian theme. Is it coming? Because it's not a very active model, and it's not interacting with the Necron in any way. So if you're trying to show that it killed this Necron, you could tear him apart and just leave a head under the Llama Cat's foot. I'm gonna keep calling it a Llama Cat, sorry. And then one leg strewn somewhere else on the base. And that would do the same job as telling you, oh, it came and it killed. This is his opponent, and he killed it. And you wouldn't have to paint a whole figure. And if you're entering a competition, well, that's going to save you hours. So there you go. And you could have the head. Head's the most important bit. That's why bases always have skulls on them. And you could still have your glowing eye to show you can do OSL, and you could still have a nice length of that leg to show you got that cool Sky Earth non-metallic metal thing going on without having to do the whole thing. and that also means you've got less places to make a mistake if that's the kind of competition that you've entered. Also, the way the llama cat's sitting into the base is a little bit weird. Its back legs are kind of blending in. I don't know if it's to do with the photographs or not. Like its back left foot looks like its toenails. It might be one of those GW models where its toes are actually part of the base. I don't know. I've not assembled it, but it looks a bit odd.
No, it's not. No.
Yeah, okay. But it looks a little bit like, I don't know, maybe you got some paint from the nails onto the base or whatever. And then the front feet are floating like ever so slightly. But again, for a competition, they might look at it and go like, oh, here are two equally exceptional models. This one has slightly floating feet. Bronze, whatever. So that's just, for me, like, if you were looking to enter a competition, think about how necessary each of the elements are and how much kind of effort per how much value you're getting out of each piece in terms of how much effort you're having to put into it. This is a super looking model, and it's been a pleasure looking at it.
Yeah, I agree, man. It's one of the better ones that I've seen. I would like to draw your attention, though, Mr. O'Brien, to the title of the piece, "Wrong Turn," which I think is one of the coolest things about this. Is how he's told the story with those two words. Yeah, they're not allies, so he's definitely been executed by the kiddie. And the story it tells me is he's definitely bumped into this thing he didn't mean to, and it stole his mind. So he wouldn't, because it's a mind stealer's pharynx, it wouldn't necessarily have to disembowel him or eviscerate him or garrote him and make a mess. And to me, the glowing gold eyes, because I don't know why it's portrayed that way to me, is the mind of that Necron thing. It's now glowing out of his eyes because he's just nicked it, and now he's just proudly, who's the boss, Daddy? So that's the story that it's telling to me. So I think that they actually integrate really, really powerfully. But if you didn't put "Wrong Turn" at the bottom, that wouldn't happen. So that is an absolutely world-class title for this mini diorama that's going on here. That's so exciting. I love this model so much. But what you said about the floating feet is definitely a solid point on this for competition. The back foot's hanging off the base. So you definitely need to pump that up somehow with a rock or some other matter material. Same for the feet, as Matt said. But also, more alarmingly, so does the Necron appear to be floating quite a lot, like hanging off the base. So I don't know if that's because there isn't really a picture of the back side of it. It's all sort of from the front, or there's this one picture of the Necron from top down, but I can't actually see what's supporting like his head and shoulders off the floor. So that's a bit of a worry compositionally, because as previously mentioned, incredible paint job, especially on the face and the fur, and like the secondary reflections that are in the gold, like on the shin pads on it. Absolutely stellar work there, man. I think the only issue I've got really with the gold is that the amulet things that are in the hair are a little bit too close to the tone of the hair, so they don't contrast as well as they could if they were a different color. That's the only like compositional coloring problem that I can really see on it. The rest of it's absolutely stunning and gorgeous, but the face just blows the whole rest of the model away because that is just absolutely world class. It's so good. I can't say that enough. It is amazing. So yeah, between the face, I don't know which I like more, the face or the title that tells the story in just 2 words. It's epic, man. Awesome work, Mike. Well done. Alex, do you wanna chip in?
Yeah, just only thought of it then, just because you mentioned the title there. Obviously you say that sort of makes it a bit obvious or more obvious what the sort of intended story is there. But this is when considering competition pieces, I would say that the piece should be able to sell without the name, and you should be able to get the story from what you're showing, because there'll be pieces out there that won't have a nameplate, and there'll be and a lot of rubrics in competitions stipulate that nameplates and things are not to be considered in the judging. So the fact that that's required to sort of tell the story, to me, it would depend on the competition. Again, it comes back to that sort of thinking about what you're going to be entering. If it were a GW competition where Warhammer lore is kind of important, and the idea of it being, this sort of mind steely thing, I didn't know that. To me, if I looked at this in a competition that wasn't a Games Workshop one, I wouldn't pick up on that at all. But if it's a Games Workshop competition, that's the lore is par with the course, it's part of the territory. So it just comes down to knowing what competition you're going to enter. Again, just in terms of what your, whether you should be having a bit more connection between the two. But besides that, I think we've all said about the face. Honestly, like the first 2 or 3 times I looked at the photos, I didn't see anything but the face. It just draws the attention in so well. The way you've got that brighter highlight there and everything, it just sort of. And I think you mentioned it, Matt, on the horns, and the way you've got that nice bright reflection on there. It just sort of sells really well for the material it is. It doesn't look. It has that look of, you can tell that's a horn, but also it looks like a shiny sort of not quite natural horn. It looks really nice, and fits with it really well. I really like how you've done that, and the sort of the hair as well. Although it's that those braided patterns can be a little bit sort of tricky to pick out and make look like actual sort of hair or fur or whatever it is that it's meant to be. But you've got it sort of reading that with that quite well, with the sort of overall volume. You've not fallen into that trap that a lot of people do of painting sort of hair and fur in all the little individual sort of bumps and ridges that these models often get sculpted with. You've highlighted the volume of it as one piece, which makes it come across really naturally, and I really like that. My biggest thing on this is, two things that are neither really massive, but for me, your gold could just do with a little bit more of that sort of pure white sort of glint highlight in a few places. There's a few places where like the top plate of the top sort of round highlight of his front leg guard thing, to me that doesn't quite go shiny enough. It's quite a rich, quite sort of lively gold you've got there. So for me, I'd expect it to be just that little bit more glinty to it. But again, that's a personal preference of the person viewing it. And the other thing for me is it doesn't really have the piece overall doesn't really have a distinct sort of light direction overall. You've got a general sort of noon, direct above sun, slightly cloudy day sort of lighting, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's fine to paint that way. But again, it comes down to sort of considering for competition, a striking sort of lighting condition or light direction can do you better. It's not necessarily that it's a better way to paint or a better sort of what's more right. It's just that it opens up a lot more doors for artistic and dramatic lighting. So it's just something to consider for competition pieces in future, is just maybe a more dramatic lighting, just to sell a bit of motion without really having to do much with the models. But honestly, it's a stunning piece there for you. So well done on that.
Yeah, I can't take the excitement anymore. I think that's a pretty high place to leave it for part 1, don't you think, guys?
Yeah.
Totally.
All right, so cool. Part 2 will be kicking off probably in a week or so, maybe a couple of days. But yeah, Eddie, that'll be you'll be up first in the next one. So thanks everyone who submitted so far, and we'll see you for part 2 next week. Cheers, guys.